Hi, wonderful people. I'm Leah Rapaner. As a sociologist, University of Melbourne professor, founder of the Gender Equity Initiative, director of the Future of Work Lab, woman, wife, and mother, I've made it my life's mission to take down every ridiculous gender myth out there. Together, we'll deep dive into the research to get to the bottom of all these misperceptions that are holding all of us back. Don't worry, I've studied these types of questions for decades, and after publishing countless articles exactly on these topics, I know when they are nonsense or real truths. And I'm going to help you learn that too. So here we go. Let's do it. This is Misperceived. Let me ask you a question. Have you ever been engaged in a conversation, out with friends for dinner, at the family dinner table, somewhere where you're supposed to be with other people, paying attention, listening to their lives, caring, and just for one split second, you decide, I'm just going to look at my phone. You either get a text or a message, or you want to see what's happening in the world, and that person continues to talk, and you think, it's okay, I got this. I can hear what they're saying and do something at the same time and still be engaged in the conversation. And then they turn to you and ask you some sort of question or what you thought or how you felt. And you have literally no idea what just happened. What's going on here? I thought we were all supposed to be good at multitasking. And in fact, aren't women supposed to be even better than men at doing these tasks? So on today's Misperceived, we're going to unpack the idea that women are better multitaskers. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about what the research shows. What actually is multitasking? So multitasking is this act of performing several independent tasks within a short period of time. It's this idea of doing two things at once, right? Can we actually multitask? And the research is really, really clear. No one can multitask. Our brains are not good at and not able to multitask. Okay, so what does the research show? Well, the first thing is that we need to understand what is multitasking. So it's this idea that we can perform several independent tasks within a short period of time. The thing is that no one is really good at multitasking. Our brains just aren't wired for it. We can't really multitask. But what we're really good at is switching across tasks, and we do that quite quickly. Well, researchers measure multitasking in two ways. The first is this thing called task switching. It's where you go from one task to another. And when researchers do it, it's something like working on a word puzzle and then switching to a Sudoku. So thinking about these kind of tasks that you might switch across and you might do it quickly. The other thing you can do is a dual task, and that's that idea of having to do two things at the same time. Sometimes we can multitask, and those things are really only when there's very simple automatic tasks that are almost innate in our brain. I want you to think about chewing gum and walking. At that moment in time, you are actually doing two things simultaneously, but they're so kind of inherent into our core that you can do them simultaneously. But when things are less automatic, people really can't multitask. They can't do two things at the same time. And scientists try to test this by giving people information to process simultaneously, doing these dual tasks at the same time. So for a small portion of this time, your brain is actually processing both pieces of information. But then what it's doing is it's deciding which task to go to first. Let me give you some examples, because I know this sounds like really hard science, but it's really not. The first is like simulating driving. So researchers sometimes ask people to do these dual tasks while driving. For example, they might have you simulating driving, and they might ask you to change a lane while also identifying spelling mistakes, or pull out a tissue from your pocket while you're changing a lane, or read directions while you're changing a lane, or dial a phone number on a phone while changing a lane. I'm going to give you an example from my own life. The other day, I was driving home and I did stop to get one little baby French fry and maybe a little baby McDonald's chocolate sundae. And because I was so hungry trying to eat and drive at the same time, I could feel my brain having a hard time switching between, because I don't know if you've ever tried to hold a French fry or hold a spoon while simultaneously shoving a giant bucket of fries into your mouth and then a giant sundae, but that requires some dexterity, right? You have to make sure you're keeping track about what's happening ahead. You're putting the spoon into the sundae and then you're getting that spoon into your mouth. And what I could feel in that moment was my brain couldn't do it all at once. So I was going, what's happening in front of me? Am I going to get into an accident? No. Okay. Now I can eat a bite of this. So this is that type of thing where what you're doing is you can't actually multitask. I couldn't eat and drive, but what I could do was drive and then not pay attention to the driving and eat and not pay attention to the driving, right? You're switching between. This is what your brain does. It switches across tasks very, very quickly, and you feel like you're multitasking, but you can't. So there's some questions about why humans can't multitask. What's going on? Why can't we do it? And the truth of the matter is scientists don't actually know. They don't know why our brains can't multitask. They have some ideas and they have some theories, but it's not super clear. One is that you just don't have the capacity. So capacity sharing argues that you only have a certain amount of mental resources to process tasks. So when your brain is being asked to do multiple things, its capacity is being divided and therefore the performance is impaired. It is like having all the windows open on your computer. Your computer has a certain amount of storage, a certain amount of RAM, a certain amount of ability, and the more things you add to it, it's just splicing up that storage. So that's what you should think about multitasking doing. It's just hard for your brain because it's kind of draining. Another explanation, and this is perhaps the most common, is that humans are poor multitaskers because of this bottleneck. This theory kind of says, basically there's a single mechanism in the brain and multitasking draws upon multiple mechanisms all at the same time. And so when this occurs, when you're kind of trying to pull from different areas, there's a bottleneck in your brain and it has to decide which one it's going to do now and which one it's going to do later. It's kind of like a road and you have a traffic jam and all the cars are trying to get to the same place coming from different directions, and your brain is deciding which one goes through first, which is the most urgent. There's a final theory that talks about the different types of information being processed. And it's saying that basically when you ask from different parts of the brain, it's hard for it to do it simultaneously. But when you're using the same channels, that's why sometimes we can multitask. So think about when you are listening to music and writing. You're using kind of the same function of the brain, the listening part, the verbal part, and those things can happen simultaneously because they're in the same channels, because they're pulling from the speech functions of the brain. So sometimes we can feel like we're multitasking, but really what we're doing is we're in the same channel. And if you actually really think about it, when you're writing, sometimes you're not really listening to the music. Have you ever tried to write and listen to the lyrics at the same time? Hard to do, but it's kind of happening in the background. So thinking about some of these things come in the foreground, they're kind of the primary task, and some of these come in the background, they're the secondary task. Now, I'm talking to you about multitasking, and I'm basically telling you we're not good at it. What we're good at doing is task switching. Our brains literally very rarely can do two things at once, with the exception of kind of automatic things like walking and chewing gum or listening to music and writing. But then I also told you that there's this myth that women are better multitaskers. And that's actually really problematic. Let me tell you why. Because if I'm telling you that we're not good at multitasking, what we're good at is switching between tasks very quickly. And I'm telling you that all this work of multitasking is actually draining your energy, draining your brain, draining your capacity. And then I tell you, but hey, wait a minute, women are really good at this. Then that means what we're doing is we're putting one group, women, into this position of being drained constantly or more significantly, more severely by a gender myth, by something that actually isn't true, by something that actually isn't borne out in the science. And so we have one group that we're saying, you're really good at this. Let's give you more of this work. But they're actually not good at it. And the answer is no one's good at it. And so you're draining someone's battery and leaving one group's intact. But the other thing to know is that actually every time we task switch, even though we can do it and we do it quickly, there's a switching cost. And what that means is switching across these tasks makes us slower, less accurate. It's a drain. And so if you have one group that's being told, you're really good at multitasking, but each time they do that, they're actually drained a little bit more, less accurate, and it slows their brains down, So, what does the research show? Well, the challenge with this research is it's really mixed. And some of the studies, I'm going to be honest with you, aren't well designed. They're looking at very few people. They're looking at kind of task switching that doesn't exist in the real world. They're not benchmarking gender in their analysis. So, they're making these claims about men and women's ability to multitask, but really that's not how the studies were designed. They're using really small sample sizes and they're not explicitly testing gender differences. This is a problem. So there was this one study in 2019 by Patricia Hirsch, Erin Koch, and Julia Karbach, in which they actually are explicitly testing gender differences in multitasking. And what they do is they take 48 men and 48 women, and what they're asking them to do is identify letters and numbers. So in some of the experiments, they were required to pay attention to two tasks at once. This is that concurrent multitasking. While in others, they were having to switch between. So switch between letters and numbers. And this is called sequential multitasking. So they were basically looking at these two different types of multitasking, doing things at once or task switching. And what they did was they were looking at the reaction time, they were looking at the accuracy, they were looking at the speed, and they were seeing, do actually women do better work on this? Or are they faster? Are they more accurate than men? And the answer is no. There was no difference. Actually, men were just as bad at multitasking as women. Men were just as inaccurate, men were just as slow, and there is, in fact, no difference between the groups in terms of task switching or doing things together. So this is again the question. If women's brains are equally strained by multitasking, why do we keep asking women to do the work? And more importantly, what are the consequences? We keep asking women to multitask in all these areas of their lives because we think they can hold it all together better and at once than men. And we are especially good at doing this around the care aspect. And what I mean is asking them to have kind of an overview on care at home, care at work, care in their family lives. They pick up the slack on projects at work. They're asked to remember colleagues' birthdays. They're doing all of this multitask working, both at work and at home. And it's really bad. They're not better at it. It actually is fragmenting their time. It's fragmenting their ability to concentrate. It's distracting. So Shearer Offer in her 2014 article in Sociological Forum looks at multitasking in particular for parents. And one of the things she found was that fathers think more about stuff with their job than do mothers, right? But this didn't seem to cross over into their home lives. But mothers think about their job stuff. And it really did spill into their home life. It spilled into their leisure time, and it was really bad for their mental health. So when we ask women to be kind of mentally multitasking or in charge of all of this different stuff going on, what we can see is that it impacts them. It fragments their leisure. It spills into their home life. It impacts their mental health and well-being. And so the challenge is that public opinion persists that women have some sort of biological edge as these like super efficient multitaskers. But the study and the research show this just isn't true. There's no evidence about this. This is a misperception. This means that the extra family work women perform is just that, extra work. We're just asking women to do extra work, and we need to see it as such. It's important to think about like kind of where this is coming from. So there are research showing that decades of socialization of women into this helper role, into this idea that they should be there to be kind, deferential, helpful to others. And we know from a young age that young girls are modeling their behavior after their mothers. So if mothers are doing more multitasking, young girls may pick this up through socialization. But we also know that offices ask women to multitask. Friends ask women to multitask. Community groups volunteer. There's all these kind of areas where women got asked to do work on top of work on top of work and often simultaneously. And so if we assume they're doing that because they're better at that, we're wrong. What do we care? Why should we think about this? The idea that women are better multitaskers is a big, fat misperception. No one is good at it. And so asking women to multitask is just going to drain their mental energy faster and lead them to burnout. So we need to stop swapping this lie, work on sharing the tasks that no one wants to do, and share them more equally, and to build resilience. One of the challenges with this multitasking research is that they're often asking people to do things in a lab or simulated, right? Pretending to drive while taking out a napkin or matching letters and numbers to it. But people have much more complex lives, and multitasking happens in more interesting and dynamic ways in the day to day. And so our research team is really interested in trying to unpack this a little bit, trying to understand how people multitask based on the lived experiences of women who are balancing a range of issues. And we would love to hear what you think and how you do it. So we have a little website on our Gender Equity Initiative website at the University of Melbourne through our Future of Work lab, where we're asking you to just do a simple task. Try a puzzle, try a Sudoku, and see how it goes for you. And what we wanted to do was kind of think about the things that are coming through women's minds day to day. Have I forgotten the laundry? What about the kids? Is there enough groceries at home? Did my child do the homework? Is my boss mad at me? All that mental energy that then requires women to think about different things. We'll share it through on our show notes so you can access it after the show. Once we have enough data, we'll feed it back. We'll let you know what we're finding from this research. But the research is clear. Task switching is costly and no one can multitask. So feeding through this misperception that women are actually, in fact, inherently better multitaskers is a lie. What happens for you? Like, did you believe this myth? Did you think, actually women are inherently better multitaskers? Do you think you do it better at work? Do you get given work from your friends, your colleagues, your boss, your family, because there's an assumption that you are in fact better at this work? And what does that do for you? Is it enriching? Does it feel good to do it? Or do you find that it's draining? Or does it really depend on the task? And now that you know that actually your brain is no better at multitasking, you are just as bad at it as your partner, as the men in your life, as everyone else that surrounds us, are you going to continue to do it? Or do you think that you might make different decisions? We'd love to hear what you think, how you're processing this. Now, I know everything I'm saying to you is like a little bit complex and I'm talking about a range of research, but don't panic. I wrote an article for the conversation, free, accessible, easy to get, where I summarize all this. And what was so interesting is after I wrote this article, it went viral in Japan. So what's happening there? What's going on in terms of multitasking? If you've lived there, you are Japanese, you live in Japan, send us through what's going on. Why did this resonate? Isn't that so interesting? As per always, I thank you so much for listening to Misperceived, where we're telling you you're not a good multitasker, and therefore you're being asked to do more work, so drop it. And where you don't need a PhD, you just get to come hang out with me. This podcast was produced with the support of the incredible Sophie Squires, the wonderful Kate Danger, the fantastic Rich Berner, and the one and only, the best ever made, Serena Reagan. I would like to acknowledge that our podcast is recorded on the lands of the Wurundjeri Woi-wurrung people of the Kulin Nation and pay my respects to their elders past and present. I extend that respect to Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people listening today.